All right, so today we're diving deep, really deep into the Weimar Republic.
Fascinating period.
Yeah. A lot of folks, I think, see it as like a cautionary tale,
Yeah.
right? Democracy, resilience, and then, well,
Yeah, the pull of
the
extremism.
pull of extremism. Exactly.
How could it all go so wrong?
Yeah, how could it all go so wrong? So you shared some excellent material with me, and I think it really digs into some of the complexities there, sort of paints a picture of Germany in 1918, new democracy, fresh out of World War I, but
It had a lot of baggage.
a lot of baggage. That's a good way to put it.
The transition
Yeah.
from, monarchy to democracy,
Sure, too.
huge
Yeah.
undertaking. And, you can't ignore the impact of the war itself, right?
Absolutely. I mean, the text really highlights this mix of hope and hardship that was going on at the time. I mean, you've got this brand new constitution,
Right.
promising freedom, promising rights, and yet at the same time, you've got people dealing with
Huge problems.
hunger.
Poverty.
Yeah. Poverty, anger over the Treaty of Versailles. I mean, yeah.
Huge. How do you even begin to...
Yeah, how do you even begin to govern in that kind of environment?
Right. And that treaty,
Yeah.
I mean, it really...
Sir.
Scars, yeah, both economically and psychologically.
Yep.
I mean, Germany was saddled with this massive war debt,
Yeah.
exceeding, 150 billion marks by 1919.
Yeah. It's just an astronomical sum. And I think sometimes we forget the scale of the
Devastation.
the devastation, the impact that kind of debt has on a country that's
Already
struggling.
just trying to rebuild
Yeah.
from the ground up.
The text also, it mentions this, the British naval blockade during the war and its impact, especially on food supplies,
Oh, yeah?
that must have just contributed to...
The unrest,
Yeah.
the resentment.
And then you've got these, these different groups, all with different ideas of what Germany should look like.
All right. You had folks who wanted to go back to the old ways, the monarchists.
Right.
You had those advocating for a completely different system, a socialist revolution, the communists.
And everything in between.
Oh, yeah.
Everything in between.
The Weimar Constitution.
Yeah.
Trying to address all of that.
Yeah.
Trying to create
Yeah.
a system
more inclusive, more representative.
How did the system actually work, though? I mean, it seems incredibly complex.
Yeah. Well, they introduced this system called proportional representation. So even small parties
Okay.
could get seats in the parliament based on the percentage of votes.
Interesting.
The idea was to make sure all voices were heard, all views represented. The problem is
IQ.
it made it really difficult to form a stable government.
Yeah, because you've got all these
Coalitions.
coalitions fall apart constantly.
It's almost like you're trying to steer a ship, but you have a dozen different captains,
Yeah.
all pulling in different directions.
A lot of competing voices, a lot of agendas.
Yeah.
It was a constant balancing act.
And on top of all of that, you've got this war-torn economy. I mean, the Treaty of Versailles alone.
6.6 billion pounds in reparations. It's just an incredible burden
On a
that.
country that's just trying to get back on its feet.
Yeah. Imagine trying to rebuild your house while paying off a debt.
That's the size of a small country, basically.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah. And then in 1923, you have France and Belgium occupying the Ruhr.
Yeah, the industrial heartland of Germany.
Germany's industrial heartland.
Oh.
Because Germany fell behind on those reparation payments.
Cripple the economy even further.
Which led to hyperinflation.
Oh, yeah, one of the worst.
I mean, when you read about it, it's just mind-boggling. People needing wheelbarrows.
Wheelbarrows full of cash.
Just to buy a loaf of bread.
People's savings just wiped out.
Overnight.
It created this sense of panic and just complete instability.
I can't imagine living through something like that.
There was some relief, though. In 1924, the Dawes Plan came into effect.
Okay. So the Dawes Plan, what did that actually do?
It reduced the reparation payments,
Mm-hmm.
and it secured loans from the U.S.
Okay. So some breathing room.
Right.
Mm.
A lifeline.
Was this a sign, do you think, that things were turning around for the Weimar Republic?
I mean, it provided some stability, but
Short term.
short term.
Yeah.
But it also made Germany very dependent on those foreign loans.
Okay.
Vulnerable.
It's vulnerable to the global economy.
And that would come back to haunt them later.
Oh, I have to dig into that a little bit more.
Yeah, the Dawes Plan, it helped, but
Yeah.
it didn't really address the root causes.
No.
The political and social stuff
Mm.
still bubbling under the surface.
Yeah, and the stab in the back myth. I mean, talk about a false narrative taking hold.
Powerful propaganda.
It really is.
Oh,
How did this myth, how did it actually play into the rise of extremism?
well, it fed this idea that Germany didn't lose the war, on the battlefield.
Right.
They were
It was
betrayed.
by enemies within
Yeah.
politicians,
Liberal.
liberals, Jews. It
Yeah.
resonated with people, people who are struggling, looking for someone to blame.
Creates a climate of distrust
Oh, yeah.
and suspicion
Yeah. Makes it easier for these extremist groups
to gain a foothold.
to take root.
So, who are we talking about here? What were the main groups that were vying for power?
Well, you had the communists, the KPD.
All right.
They saw the Weimar Republic as, a failed capitalist experiment
Right.
ripe for revolution.
So there was looking into
Overthrow the government,
Yeah.
establish a socialist state,
modeled after
the Bolsheviks,
the Bolsheviks. Okay.
Russia.
And then on the right, you've got
A whole mishmash.
a whole mishmash.
A nationalist, monarchist groups.
Okay. What are they trying to do?
Some wanted to go back to the old imperial order.
Okay.
Others wanted something new, but definitely more authoritarian.
More militaristic.
Yeah.
They all seem to agree on one thing, though.
Treaty of Versailles.
Treaty of Versailles, yeah.
Humiliation.
And that Germany,
The strong leadership.
yeah, to get back to where they were.
Right.
The text mentions the Nazi Party, fairly small.
Early days, yeah. In the early days. How did they end up rising to prominence in this chaotic?
They were very good at exploiting the situation.
Okay.
The anxieties,
Yes, they're there.
the resentment,
Yeah.
nationalist rhetoric,
Okay.
anti-Semitic scapegoating,
And promise.
economic revival.
Okay, so appealing
A
to
lot of people.
broad spectrum.
Yeah, a lot of disillusioned Germans.
It's interesting that they used the term socialist in their name. Their
Yeah.
ideology, I mean,
Wasn't
isn't really socialist.
Not in the traditional sense. They were
Yeah.
masters of propaganda,
So they're just using the term.
tailoring their message
Okay.
to whoever they needed to.
So incorporating
Yeah.
incorporating some of that socialist rhetoric to appeal to,
A working class.
okay, the working class who are really struggling in this economy.
Absolutely.
So you've got this mix, right? You've got the economic hardship, political instability, nationalism, anti-Semitism, populism, all feeding into the Nazi Party's rise. It's a familiar playbook, isn't it?
It is, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But they weren't just angry ideologues. They were organized,
Okay.
a political force.
So how do they go from this fringe party to a real threat?
Marches,
Yeah.
propaganda.
Okay.
They created this sense of unity, of purpose. They drew people in.
Chilling to
Yeah.
see how they manipulated media.
And public perceptions.
Yeah.
And,
How vulnerable was the Weimar Republic to that kind of manipulation?
well, it was a young democracy.
Right.
Institutions.
It's still fragile.
Fragile, yeah.
Mhm.
And they weren't equipped to deal with that level of propaganda.
Okay, so you've got the communists on one side,
Right.
various right-wing groups on the other.
Yeah.
The government just
Trying to hold it together.
trying to hold it all together. How does this play out?
It gets more and more volatile.
Okay.
Street clashes,
Yeah.
opposing groups.
Yeah.
The government's losing control.
And then the Great Depression hits.
1929.
Yeah.
Major turning point.
I was going to say that must have...
Just amplified everything.
Yeah, what happens?
I mean, unemployment, businesses collapsing.
People losing faith.
Yeah. In the government, in the system.
And that creates...
The perfect breeding ground for extremism.
And the Nazi Party.
They were ready.
They were ready.
They were waiting.
They were waiting.
They offered this, this vision of order, of prosperity.
Okay.
And of course, they had their scapegoats.
The government.
The liberals, the Jews,
Yeah.
anyone they could blame.
So the stage is set, right?
Yeah.
But how do they actually take control? I mean, does this happen overnight?
Not overnight, no. It's a
What
process. Calculated.
So they're using legal means, but also
Intimidation, violence.
Yeah.
They're chipping away
at democracy.
at democracy.
It's a reminder
Yeah.
that even in democracies,
Seemingly stable.
seemingly stable
Yes.
democracies, things can shift,
Quickly.
especially when you've got these groups, these extremist groups.
Exploiting every crisis, every vulnerability.
And we're seeing that today, aren't we?
Yeah. We have to be vigilant.
You have to be vigilant. We are.
Recognize the warning signs.
Yeah.
Understand how this happens.
So we've covered a lot of ground, right? I mean, we've talked about the birth of the Weimar Republic, the rise of the Nazi Party, the impact of the Great Depression.
And how all those things
all those things
are connected to understand the 20th century.
Yeah, you have to understand this period.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we're back. And I guess you could say this is the final chapter of the Weimar Republic, right?
Yeah, a tragic one.
A tragic one for sure. I mean, we've seen how the economic turmoil, the political maneuvering, it all kind of created this this pathway for the Nazi Party.
A pathway to power.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What were the specific events, though, that really led to their takeover?
Well, the Reichstag fire,
Yeah. Yeah.
February 1933. Huge. This fire, it badly damaged the Reichstag building,
Which is where?
the German parliament,
Okay.
and the Nazis.
Of course.
They saw an opportunity.
They used it, didn't they?
Oh, yeah. They immediately blamed the communists for the fire.
Okay, so they used this tragedy
To stoke fear, to justify a crackdown.
on anyone who opposed them.
Anyone they saw as a threat.
So Hitler, he goes to President Hindenburg
Right.
and gets him to sign this Reichstag fire decree.
Yeah, basically suspended civil liberties,
Wow.
allowed them to arrest, detain
Anyone.
anyone they wanted,
Just like they just silenced all opposition.
pretty much.
So how does this shift the balance of power within the government?
Well, with their opponents out of the way,
Okay.
they could really consolidate their power.
And then the March 1933 elections
Right, they got the most seats,
in the Reichstag.
but still not a majority.
Okay, so they still had a bit more work to do
They needed more.
to really implement their agenda. So how did they do it?
Intimidation,
Okay.
backroom deals.
Uh-huh.
They pushed through this Enabling Act,
Enabling Act, and that essentially...
gave Hitler dictatorial powers,
Wow, so he can...
bypass the Reichstag, make laws on his own.
So it's really just a complete transformation.
Yeah, from a fledgling democracy,
Well,
an
it's first-
authoritarian regime.
Yeah, and in such a short period of time, it's really quite remarkable.
Frightening, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It really is. What happened to the folks who spoke out, who opposed the Nazis?
Arrested,
They're pressed,
imprisoned,
right?
exiled,
Yeah.
concentration camps,
Yeah, for political prisoners, anyone they considered an enemy,
free speech, gone,
counter unions,
banned, outlawed. I mean, it was a one-party state.
totalitarian state. It's just a tragic end, isn't it, to the Weimar Republic?
Yeah. You know, they'd strived
Yeah.
for democracy, for progress.
And it just...
fell apart.
Yeah, looking back, what do you think were the biggest factors, the things that really contributed to this outcome?
I mean, the Great Depression was huge, right? It just created this,
Yeah, this breeding ground.
yeah, for these extreme ideas. And the Weimar Constitution itself,
Okay.
it had its flaws.
Yeah.
You know, the proportional representation.
Yeah.
And it didn't really have strong safeguards.
Against the abuse of power.
Exactly.
Uh,
And you can't forget the Treaty of Versailles. That
Right.
resentment
It's just festered.
was like a gift to the Nazis.
To exploit.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that democracy...
It's fragile.
Yeah.
It needs to be
We
protected.
can't take it for granted.
No, we can't. We have to be vigilant.
We have to protect those institutions.
And those values.
This has been incredible. I mean, really a fascinating...
A complex story.
Yeah, a complex story, but such an important one.
And relevant.
Yeah, I mean, what can we learn from this? What can we take away from the Weimar Republic's experience?
That democracy is precious and it's fragile. That we have to safeguard our civil liberties. You know, promote social and economic justice. Build a culture of tolerance and respect. And be very wary of those who exploit fear and division.
I think that's a good takeaway. I mean, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
Yeah.
And it's clear that the Weimar Republic
has a lot to teach us.
Yeah, it has a lot to teach us. So thank you to everyone for listening to this deep dive. We hope you found it informative, and we hope you'll join us again soon.